Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com.
Taking calcium is supposed to keep bones strong, but how good is calcium for preventing osteoporosis? This is the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
Osteoporosis is devastating since it can lead to broken bones and all the problems that they bring. But studies of calcium have been surprisingly disappointing. Does the dose need to be even higher, or has calcium been oversold?
Ads featuring celebrities with milk mustaches are eye-catching, but perhaps they're leading us astray. Could the solution to osteoporosis be an entirely different way of eating?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, we'll talk with leading nutrition expert Dr. Walter Willett about his recommendations for preventing osteoporosis.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, marijuana may offer relief from pain. A very small study from McGill University in Montreal suggests that pot might ease chronic nerve pain called neuropathy. 21 adults who suffered from neuropathic pain brought on by surgery or accident were randomized to receive low-dose, medium-dose, and high-dose marijuana or placebo cigarettes. The subjects rated their pain on an 11-point scale. They were also questioned about quality of life factors such as mood and sleep. Pain scores were lower after the volunteers were exposed to high-dose marijuana with 9.4% tetrahydrocannabinol. Subjects also slept better and were less anxious. At this dose, the cigarettes produced side effects in some subjects, including dry eyes, headaches, and burning sensations. The subjects did not report getting high. Other researchers were intrigued by the findings, but stressed that long-term safety concerns will need to be addressed before this treatment is used more widely.
Evidence is mounting that berries may be good for the brain. The latest research comes from the Tufts University Department of Agriculture Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging. Investigators reported that aging microglia in mouse brains lose efficiency over time. Polyphenols from blackberry, blueberry, or strawberry extracts reverse microglial dysfunction in cell cultures. The anthocyanins found in red or blue fruits are especially helpful in revitalizing microglial activity, which is important for maintaining cognitive function.
Blueberries may have competition for antioxidant power. Scientists at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge have found that black rice is also rich in anthocyanins. In fact, on a gram-for-gram basis, black rice beats blueberries in antioxidant potential. Black rice was referred to as forbidden rice in ancient China because its consumption was reserved for the emperor and his court. These days, black rice is not so exclusive and may be more economical than fresh blueberries.
The DASH diet, also known as Dietary Approaches for Stopping Hypertension, is well recognized for its ability to lower blood pressure. Even more important, there's evidence that eating fruits and vegetables, low-fat dairy products, whole grains, poultry, fish, and nuts, and cutting back on sugar and soft drinks can reduce the risk of heart disease. New research suggests such a diet may be especially helpful for African Americans. The investigators estimate that for this group, a DASH-type diet would reduce the 10-year risk of heart disease by over 20%. That's because it helps lower both blood pressure and cholesterol. Getting people to increase their consumption of fruits and vegetables, however, remains a big challenge. The DASH diet calls for 9 to 11 servings daily.
Recent research suggests that social relationships have a profound impact on longevity. Investigators analyzed nearly 150 human trials and concluded that isolation and loneliness are as dangerous as well-established risk factors such as smoking, physical inactivity, and obesity. Now, a study in mice reinforces this finding. Scientists at Ohio State University housed male mice by themselves or with a female mouse companion for 2 weeks before surgically inducing a heart attack. The researchers then tracked heart function carefully for 1 week. The mice with partners had significantly less heart damage and better heart rate variability than the mice that were living alone. Social interaction also improved other biomarkers such as less inflammation in the brain and lower levels of the stress hormone corticosterone. These findings reinforce the idea that social interaction affects the brain and body and can have a profound impact on organs like the heart.
Ever since doctors have been able to test women for the genes that increase the risk of breast cancer, women have been wondering what they should do with this information. A new study shows that women with BRCA1 and 2 mutations can lower their risk of breast cancer by having preemptive mastectomy. Having a hysterectomy before the age of 50 to remove the ovaries also lowers the risk of ovarian and breast cancer. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about bones. For decades, women have been told that they need extra calcium to keep their bones strong and prevent osteoporosis. Vitamin and food manufacturers have fortified lots of products with calcium in the hope that consumers will favor them, but how good is the science supporting calcium to fight osteoporosis? We'll find out about an alternative perspective on bone health.
We're talking today with Michael Castleman. He is a medical journalist and the author of more than a dozen books. We are talking about his newest book, Building Bone Vitality, a revolutionary diet plan to prevent bone loss and reverse osteoporosis. He co-authored it with Dr. Amy Joy Lanoux. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me on.
Michael, it used to be so easy. When I was growing up, my mother would say, drink your milk, build strong bones. And that was the end of the discussion.
Except, of course, also run and play.
Run and play, which is, of course, what we did when we were kids 40, 50 years ago. Why in the world wasn't that advice perfect, just fine the way it was? And why couldn't we just keep drinking milk and popping our calcium pills to keep our bones strong?
Well, my mother said the same thing to me, and I believed it too, until about 10 years ago when I started becoming aware of a number of studies showing that the countries that had the highest consumption of calcium also had the highest rate of osteoporotic bone fracture. And of course, this made no sense because if milk and dairy products build strong bones, the countries that consume the most calcium should have the fewest fractures. In fact, they had the most. And those countries are the United States, Western Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, and a few others. And it just made no sense to me. And I kept seeing more and more studies like this. And finally, I started to think, maybe calcium isn't the answer. And a lot of researchers in bone health were coming to the same conclusion. I mean, there are studies, for example, the Nurses' Health Study, which is a study of 90,000 American women nurses that is coordinated through Harvard University. And they followed these nurses for, in one study, they followed them for 12 years. In another study, they followed them for 18 years. And the amount of calcium that they consumed had no impact on their risk of osteoporotic fracture. Now, this is a randomized prospective trial. This is like the gold standard of studies. 90,000 people for a long, long time. And the intervention that everyone assumed works, calcium, made absolutely no difference.
Wait a minute.
That sounds heretical.
Well, it is. And I really spent 10 years sort of scratching my head over this. But fortunately, the research community, people who research bone health, for example, my co-author, Amy Lanoux, they were slowly coming to the same conclusion. Calcium is not the answer for bone health. And if you start looking at what bones are made out of, that is part of the answer, because calcium obviously is a very important part of bones and teeth. But calcium is only one of 17 nutrients that are essential to bone health. Another one is vitamin D, which is very popular now as a supplement. But there are 15 other nutrients that are absolutely essential to bone health, and those nutrients are found either exclusively or largely in fruits and vegetables, which was a very key hint to how bone health could be maximized and fracture risk reduced. If you look at the countries that have the lowest rates of osteoporotic fracture, and those are countries in Asia, primarily in Asia, some in Africa and South America. Those countries have a diet that is largely fruits and vegetables. They do eat some meat, but it's mostly fruits and vegetables. And when they eat those foods, when they eat the fruits and vegetables, they are getting the 15 other nutrients that are absolutely crucial to bone health. You know, if bones were made just out of calcium, they would be chalk. Chalk is calcium carbonate, and bones would just be chalk. Bones are not chalk. Bones are living tissue, and bones are complicated biochemically, and they've got all kinds of nutrients in them. And the way to maximize your bone health is to eat a diet that is largely based on fruits and vegetables. Now, you don't have to be a vegetarian. I am not a vegetarian. I have meat products a couple times a week, 3-4 times a week maybe. But I get 5 to 7, 8 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And one of the other things about the body is, as I'm sure you guys know and have said many times on your show, biological systems are elegant in that what is good for one part of the body is always good for other parts of the body. So the diet that we are recommending, one that is high in fruits and vegetables, is the exact same diet that the National Cancer Institute recommends to minimize risk of cancer, that the American Heart Association recommends to minimize risk of heart disease and stroke. Basically, what we are recommending is a balanced, healthy diet. And a balanced, healthy diet is good for the whole body, including your bones.
Well, Michael, if you're talking about a diet that has a lot of servings of fruits and vegetables in it every day, it almost sounds like you're talking about the DASH diet. And
yes,
we know that it's good for lowering blood pressure and probably for preventing heart attacks, but why would it be good for your bones?
Well, I'm delighted that you mentioned the DASH dietary because there have been studies, you know, the DASH diet puts people on this diet that's high in fruits and vegetables, and it has very consistently been shown to reduce blood pressure. And the DASH diet is a huge success in non-drug reduction of blood pressure. Well, when the study started coming out that fruits and vegetables also improve bone health, the people who have done the DASH studies went back in their data and started measuring people's bone mineral density. And guess what? The DASH diet improves bone mineral density substantially, in fact, better than added calcium. So I'm a big fan of the DASH diet, and it proves that a fruit and vegetable diet does help bone health. Now, why? Why would a diet high in fruits and vegetables help bone health? Basically, the answer is protein. Now, Americans love protein. Americans think that protein is the absolute nutrient that you must not be without, that if you get enough protein, everything else takes care of itself. In the gut, when you eat a high-protein meal, when you eat a bacon cheeseburger or a chicken sandwich or, a cup of yogurt, these are high-protein foods. And in the gut, that protein is broken down into amino acids. Those acids then enter the bloodstream. When you add acid to the blood becomes a little more acidic. The problem is that the blood cannot be more acidic. The blood has to maintain its pH, its acid-base balance, in a very, very narrow range. And when you pour acid into the blood, that acid has to be neutralized to get the pH of the blood down to the healthy place, up to the healthy place where it's supposed to be. So what does the body do? Well, if you've ever taken Tums for acid indigestion, you know that Tums, which are calcium carbonate, neutralize acid in the stomach. The body does the same thing when it detects that the blood is too acidic. It takes calcium carbonate and neutralizes that acid. Where does it get the calcium carbonate? From your bones. So the higher protein you eat, the more protein you eat, in your diet, the more calcium gets sucked out of your bones. And if you eat a high-protein diet for 50, 60, 70 years, your bones become osteoporotic.
Michael, let's back up a little bit. You're saying we need to eat less acid, and you're saying we need to do that by eating less animal protein. And you're saying we need to eat more fruits and vegetables, but aren't an awful lot of fruits full of acid? I mean, think about oranges and orange juice.
Very good point. There's a difference between acid in the gut and acid in the blood. When you eat an orange or any of the acidic fruits, they are acid going into your mouth, down your throat, and into your stomach. But once those foods are broken down and their nutrients enter the blood, they do not make the blood more acidic. In fact, they make the blood alkaline. All fruits make the blood alkaline, and all fruits are good for your bones. Now, there's protein in fruit, and so the protein in fruit gets broken down. Its amino acids go into the blood, and the protein in any food will turn the blood slightly acidic. However, fruits and vegetables also carry an enormous amount of alkaline nutrients with them. So the alkaline nutrients enter the blood at the same time as the acid. The alkaline nutrients neutralize the acid, and the body does not have to reach into bone for calcium carbonate to neutralize acid in the blood. But when you eat a Big Mac, you're getting a tremendous amount of protein with virtually no alkaline buffers. I mean, there's a little piece of lettuce, but that does not do very much. So the net effect is when you eat a high-protein food, and when you eat fast food and high-protein junk food, that goes into the blood. There's no alkaline material to buffer the acid, and the body has to reach into bone, seize calcium, and you get osteoporosis.
You're listening to Michael Castleman. He is a medical journalist and author of more than a dozen books. His latest, co-authored with Dr. Amy Lanou, is Building Bone Vitality.
Now, of course, Terry, there is some controversy about this whole acid protein issue, but I don't think there's anyone who will argue with the benefits of eating more fruits and vegetables. And, of course, the DASH diet has been around, as Michael says, for a very long time. And a lot of people go, what is that DASH diet?
How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you do that? You know, we wrote about that.
Yeah, we did. In Favorite Foods, you'll find the favorite vegetables, and here are just a few of them that we list in Favorite Foods from the People's Pharmacy: artichokes, arugula, asparagus, beet greens, as well as beets, and bell peppers and broccoli and cabbage and carrots and cauliflower and celery and collard greens, and that's just to the C's.
Too many to list here.
And, of course, our favorite fruits include everything from apples and apricots and bananas and currants and grapefruit and kiwis all the way up to pomegranates and raisins and tangerines. So there's a lot of fruits and vegetables to choose from.
A lot to choose from. And, you know, Michael mentioned the Nurses' Health Study with the long-term data. Later in the show, we'll be talking with one of the investigators who runs that study.
Dr. Walter Willett. Well, we do need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll find out more about how our diet affects bone health. We'll also learn about some of the problems associated with drugs prescribed for osteoporosis.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Redix Industries, makers of Utter Cream, Utterly Smooth Hand and Body Lotion, and Utterly Smooth Extra Care Cream enriched with urea. They're aids for dry, cracked skin. 800-345-7339. The website, uttercream.com.
And by Car Drug, providing pharmacy and related healthcare services in more than 90 locations throughout North Carolina, including pharmacists in every store providing advice on medicines, health screenings, and immunizations. Car Drug for a healthy relationship, online at kerrdrug.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334 or visit our website. It's peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we are talking about bone health with Michael Castleman. He's a medical journalist who has written more than a dozen books on health. His latest, written with co-author Dr. Amy Joy Lanou, is Building Bone Vitality.
Now, Michael, a lot of women have been told over the last 20 years, if you just take more calcium, Tums for the tummy or Oscal or some form of calcium carbonate, and maybe throw in a little vitamin D and a little magnesium, this is going to prevent bone problems as you get older. And if you show up with bone mineral density tests that are a little on the low side, we'll just give you a pill. We've got drugs now, and we'll talk about the drugs in a minute. And yet, despite all of this calcium consumption over the last decade or two, it seems as if osteoporosis and fractures are going up rather than down.
Correct. American health authorities have been telling women to eat more calcium, take the pills, drink milk, eat yogurt for 30 years now. And if they were correct, we would suspect that osteoporotic fractures should be going down or at least be leveling off. They are not. Osteoporotic fractures are going up in this country and in the Western world in general. And now they're starting to go up in Asia as, guess what? McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and all the high-protein fast food places are opening up all over the third world. So taking calcium pills really doesn't work. In fact, if you look at the research, there have been 10 good randomized prospective trials of calcium pills and their effect on fracture. Not one of them, 0 out of 10 studies, has shown a decrease in fracture for people who take calcium pills.
Now, it's so interesting to me that a lot of people in Asia have a hard time consuming milk because they may lack the enzyme lactase that breaks down milk sugar, and so they just avoid it after they get to a certain age. And I suspect that these are the populations that you're talking about who have the lowest calcium intake but the strongest bones, or at least historically speaking. Is that right?
Correct, yes. If you look at people in China, in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Japan, all these countries have cuisines that don't have any milk or dairy in them at all. I mean, Chinese people don't drink milk after they wean, and in large measure because of the high prevalence of lactose intolerance. So they wind up consuming all of their calcium from fruits and vegetables and from tofu, and they wind up on average consuming about 500 milligrams of calcium a day, which is less than half of what U.S. health authorities recommend for good health. So they're getting half the calcium that people in Washington are telling us is what we need for good health and bone strength, and yet they have much stronger bones than the typical American. The problem here is that American health authorities have not kept up with the medical literature and have not been honest with the American people about what actually strengthens bone.
Now, Michael, calcium can be in a lot of different places in the diet. It does not have to be in milk. I know that when I did my dissertation research in southern Mexico, the main source of calcium in the diet there in southern Mexico is a dietary staple that people eat every day, and they eat a lot of it. It's the corn tortilla, and because it is prepared with calcium, it provides them the calcium that they are, most of the calcium that they're consuming. So what are the sources in the Southeast Asian diet? Might not be that they're getting calcium, but just not from milk?
Yeah, they do get calcium. They get the 500 milligrams a day of calcium from non-dairy sources. No milk, no cheese, but they eat a lot of tofu, which is rich in calcium. And all fruits and vegetables contain some calcium. The critical thing here is that fruits and vegetables also contain the 15 other nutrients that are absolutely essential to bone health that American health authorities kind of ignore.
Wow. Stop right there. What are they, Michael? Tell us some of those 15 nutrients that you say are so important.
Well, vitamin K for one, and
what's vitamin K? I mean, nobody's ever heard of vitamin K. We don't swallow vitamin K very often.
Oh, but Actually, we get vitamin K every day if we're eating green leafy vegetables.
That is right.
Or if
That
you
is
drink
right.
green tea.
But it's not a very popular vitamin. I mean, it doesn't get the same media hype as vitamin D or vitamin B or vitamin...
But if you have to avoid vitamin K because you're taking Coumadin, it's actually kind of a challenge.
The nutrients that help build strong bones, in addition to vitamin K, are things like boron, copper, fluoride, magnesium, manganese, B6, vitamin A. I mean, basically all of the nutrients that you find in fruits and vegetables are going to help build your bones. And I know that what's going to happen is that if the low-acid diet perspective gets traction with the American people, the supplement companies are immediately going to start putting out, calcium plus the 15 other nutrients, blah, blah, blah. I'm just not into it. I think people should get their nutrition from food. Food is good. Nature packages all the nutrients together in delicious food that tastes better and is better for you than pills.
How good is the evidence on this low-acid diet you're talking about? Are there any actual studies of people who have done this, or is it all epidemiology?
No, there are the studies. As I was mentioning, the DASH studies. People who eat a DASH diet get a major boost in bone mineral density. And there have been 140 studies since 1975. 1975 was the year that the medical literature became easily searchable by computer. Since then, there have been 140 studies of diet and fracture risk. If you look at people who are eating high calcium, when you add calcium to the diet, only 1/3 of the studies show that calcium has anything to do with fracture reduction. 2/3 of studies, the evidence runs 2-to-1 against calcium. But if you look at the studies of bone mineral density and fracture risk and diet, what you find is that the more fruits and vegetables you eat, the better your bone mineral density is and the lower your fracture rate. I mean, the evidence is out there, and in fact, in the bone health research community, it's now basically acknowledged that the calcium theory is simply wrong, and that a diet that is high in fruits and vegetables, or a low-acid diet, one that has, the researchers call it a low-acid diet or a high-alkaline diet, is the way to beat osteoporosis.
Now, Michael, you expressed a fear that once the manufacturers got a hold of this concept that they're likely to put together a pill with 15 or 17 nutrients in them. And clearly, Americans love pills, and so do doctors. And so over the last 40 or 50 years, one of the most popular approaches to preventing and dealing with osteoporosis has been estrogen. Premarin was number one on the doctor hit parade for a very long time, and then eventually Prempro, which was Premarin and Provera, a progestin, became one of the most successful drugs in history, largely on the grounds that not only could it help relieve hot flashes, but it could keep bones strong. And then after estrogen fell into disfavor, after the Women's Health Initiative, along came the bisphosphonates, the drugs that are now so commonly prescribed and advertised on television to prevent and to treat osteoporosis, starting with Fosamax, but now we have drugs like Actonel and Boniva and Reclast, and there's a whole handful of these medications that are touted as, keep your bones strong. And Sally Field is a very strong advocate for this approach, and her commercials are very compelling. So how do you deal with this, we'll call it a juggernaut of take a pill, it'll prevent problems?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear about the fact that I'm not opposed to people at high risk of osteoporotic fracture or who have had osteoporotic fractures taking the drugs. The drugs, as a group, work reasonably well, and they work reasonably quickly. And if my mother fell and broke a hip, I would be fine with her taking the medication while she is convalescing. But the fact is, all the drugs are just not that good. I mean, if you look at the results that you get on hip fracture from Fosamax and all the other ones, you find that they reduce hip fracture anywhere from 0 to, if you're lucky, you can get 40-45% reduction in hip fracture with the drugs. But if you look at worldwide epidemiology, there are many countries out there that have osteoporotic fracture rates that are 60, 70, 75% lower than ours without taking any drugs at all. So a diet and exercise approach clearly works at twice as well as the drugs. And the research that I've seen recently is that fewer than half the women who are on osteoporotic preventive drugs follow through and take enough calcium and vitamin D. So the drugs really just don't work that well. They're very expensive, and at a time when we're trying to rein in healthcare costs, wouldn't it be better to tell people to have a salad every day at lunch than to shovel drugs down their throat, drugs that can give them esophageal ulcers and all kinds of other side effects? Not to mention the new side effect that's coming out with these drugs. You know, the drugs basically, the way they build bone is that they turn off the osteoclasts, the cells in the body that come in and gobble up weak spots in bone. If you turn off the osteoclasts, you have more bone remains. You don't digest bone. But what you wind up with is weaker bones in general. And now that these drugs have been around for a while, sort of new kinds of fractures are being identified that seem to be associated with the fact that the drugs turn off the natural mechanism to repair bone. So, while I said, and I really believe, that women who have had osteoporotic fractures are indeed good candidates for the drugs, I also would affirm, based on the research, that women who are simply told that they have low bone mineral density could probably do better eating a handful of raisins a day than they would taking Fosamax.
Well, let's get very specific. You've suggested eat a salad at lunch instead of a burger. You've suggested eat a handful of raisins a day. Those don't sound very hard, but my suspicion is that really trying to eat a low-acid diet might be difficult. Certainly people find it hard to follow a DASH diet.
Well, and you're talking about 5 to 7 helpings of fruits and vegetables a day. I suspect the average American probably doesn't get more than 3 or 4.
The average American eats fewer than 3 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and the most popular vegetable in the United States is French fried potatoes, which they are a vegetable, but in terms of
they
their
shouldn't
risk,
count.
they don't count because they're so high in fat that they vastly increase risk of cancer and heart disease. But on the other hand, think about it. Americans are eating, say, on average, 2.5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Well, they're halfway to 5. So if they just have another piece of fruit with breakfast, a salad at lunch, a fruit snack in the afternoon, I mean, it's not that difficult to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And the other thing is, there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy in the medical world. Doctors are very militant. When a smoker comes into their office, they say, you should quit smoking. And every doctor will tell you that. In fact, it's malpractice not to counsel smokers to quit. Well, smoking is clinically addictive. It's one of the hardest habits to break. And doctors are very militant, saying, you must quit. Meanwhile, someone walks into a doctor's office and says, gee, doc, it's really hard for me to eat fruits and vegetables. The doctor immediately says, I know it's hard for me too. It's really hard. Well, you know what? It's not that hard. I'm sitting here telling you it is not that hard to eat a diet that has lots of fruits and vegetables. Have a couple of pieces of fruit with breakfast. Breakfast is the easiest meal to add fruit to. Have an orange at breakfast. Have some raisins on your cereal. Have Raisin Bran. I mean, it's easy to eat fruit at breakfast. As far as lunch is concerned, it's not that difficult to have a salad, a bowl of minestrone soup, any kind of vegetable soup. It's just not that difficult. And everyone says it is, and I keep wondering, gee, it doesn't seem that hard to me.
Finally, Michael, we're really in favor of evidence on the People's Pharmacy, and I guess we'd like to see more comparative trials, head-to-head, compare drug X to drug Y, or lifestyle change C to medication D. what would you like to see when it comes to that kind of comparative work? I mean, would you like to see a comparative trial of, like Fosamax or Boniva to, maybe the high fruits and vegetables diet that you're talking about, just to see how they would compare?
Absolutely. I think the studies that you're talking about are what should be done. But one thing I should mention is that for building bone vitality, my co-author and I reviewed 1,200 studies, and they are all there for your listeners to see on our website, buildingbonevitality.com. You can see all 1,200 studies. And if you want, we'll send them to you. I mean, we got nothing to hide. This book is 100% based on the research, which is a lot more than I can say for recommendations to drink milk and take calcium pills. But yes, I would like to see studies that compare the drugs against a low-acid diet. I mentioned raisins. Raisins are one of the most alkaline fruits because all fruit is alkaline, but when you remove the water, gram for gram, it's even more alkaline. So dried fruit is one of the most alkaline bone-building things you can eat. I personally would like to see a trial, head-to-head, Fosamax against 3 handfuls of raisins a day. And I bet that after 10 years, the people eating the raisins would have stronger bones and fewer fractures than the people trying to take Fosamax and probably not being able to because of all side effects.
So it sounds like we should all be heeding Grandma's advice to eat our vegetables.
Eat your vegetables, eat fruit, eat them 5 to 8 times a day. You'll have a lower risk of heart attack, stroke, cancer, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and now, as we've proven in building bone vitality, you'll also have a much lower risk of osteoporosis.
Michael Castleman, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Michael Castleman is a medical journalist. His latest book is Building Bone Vitality, co-authored with Dr. Amy Lanoux.
And we should point out that it is very important not to stop taking your medication, including your osteoporosis medication, without your doctor's supervision.
Absolutely. Michael said food is good.
Food is good.
Fig.
Yeah.
We've actually eaten in a restaurant called Fig, which stands for food is good. And we definitely believe food is good, especially those fruits and vegetables.
The other thing that's good, Joe, is exercise. There have been numerous studies showing that exercise is critical for maintaining strong bone health.
Along with all those fruits and vegetables. Well, it is time for us to take a short break. When we come back, we'll check in with Dr. Walter Willett of the Harvard School of Public Health to see what he thinks about this unusual approach to osteoporosis prevention.
You're listening to the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's the People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red-X Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
And by Car Drug, providing pharmacy and related healthcare services in more than 90 locations throughout North Carolina, including pharmacists in every store providing advice on medicines, health screenings, and immunizations. Car Drug, for a healthy relationship, online at kerrdrug.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 752. You can also find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
We've just heard from Michael Castleman, co-author of Building Bone Vitality, It's about an unorthodox approach to preventing osteoporosis. His recommendations are so different from the usual advice that we wanted to find out what one of the world's leading nutrition scientists has to say about this concept.
We are talking today with Dr. Walter Willett. He is professor and chair of nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health. Welcome, Dr. Walter Willett.
Good to be with you again.
Well, it's great to have you with us on the People's Pharmacy. Well, I guess the first question has to do with this whole notion of osteoporosis prevention and treatment, and particularly calcium. Because I think over the last decade or two, millions and millions of women have been told that if they just increase their calcium intake or their dairy intake, they can keep their bones strong. We've talked with Michael Castleman, who's written a book called Building Bone Vitality, and he has challenged that theory. So we'd kind of like to get your perspective. Is calcium and dairy the solution to osteoporosis?
Calcium and dairy are definitely not the solution to osteoporosis. It's true that we do need some calcium in our diet. It's an element that's absolutely essential both for bone health and for many other physiologic requirements. But the question is, how much calcium do we need? And are there many people in the United States who are not getting enough calcium? And from many lines of research over the past decade or so, it's pretty clear that not very many people are going to benefit by more calcium in their diet. And perhaps consumed in the wrong way, it's even possible that there could be some harm or some increases in risk of fractures from high calcium intake.
Tell us a little bit more about that. I think that would surprise most people.
Yeah, that sounds like heresy.
It does sound like heresy because it's been so embedded in our thinking that calcium is what we need to take to prevent fractures. We've looked at this in several ways, but just if you step back and look at the overall evidence from around the world, you should at least start asking some questions about this. For example, Dr. Hegstead several decades ago looked at fracture rates around the world and national calcium consumption and found that actually it was the countries consuming the most calcium that had the highest rates of fractures. And those were the countries that were also consuming the most milk in their diets. That doesn't prove that calcium or milk causes fractures, but it raises some questions about the hypothesis that calcium is strongly protective. So we've looked at this in our large prospective studies, the Nurses' Health Study in women and Health Professionals Follow-Up Study in men, and we found that there was really no relationship between the amount of calcium or the amount of milk consumed by women or men and their risk of fractures. Probably most people are already getting enough, and just adding more isn't going to be helpful.
Well, wait a minute. Walt, how did this happen? Because, most women these days over the age of 40 or 50 have somehow heard the message from their health professional, whether it's their physician, their nurse practitioner, maybe it's their pharmacist, certainly the commercials on television, that getting calcium is good for your bones. And a lot of women are not taking 500 milligrams a day. They're not taking 1,000 milligrams a day. They're taking upwards of 1,500 milligrams of calcium in supplement form above and beyond what they're getting from their diet. So how did that juggernaut get going?
That's absolutely a perfect description of what's happening. And as you say, adding the supplements to diet often puts many women and men over 2,000 milligrams of calcium a day. Part of this has been driven by the DRI, what used to be the RDA, which says that women and men over age 50 need 1,200 milligrams at least of calcium a day to be adequate for bone health. But the problem is that this recommendation has been based on some very short-term studies lasting just a few days or a few weeks, looking at how much calcium can you force into the bone temporarily. But that doesn't really reflect what goes on over the long run. The problem is if you really up the calcium dose, you can increase the amount of calcium in the bones by roughly 2%. And that's not much in its own right, but if you say, well, 2% per year times 10 years, that would be 20%. That would be a lot, and that would be a big increase in bone mineral density is how we measure that. But in reality, that's not how it works. If you maintain that high dose, you don't continue to get increases in the calcium in the bones. In other words, it's sort of a one-time increase, and then if you reduce that high intake of calcium within a matter of months, you've lost that 2%. So these short-term studies are very misleading. And I think it's worth noting that in the United Kingdom, experts have looked at this, and they came up with 700 milligrams of calcium being adequate. Committee for the World Health Organization looked at this. They came up with 500 milligrams of calcium per day being adequate. And I think that 500 to 700 number is probably about right. And you can get that with a decent diet plus one serving of dairy a day, which is much less, of course, than is being recommended. So if there is any benefit of higher calcium intake, it's very small.
And when we talk to Michael Castleman about his approach, he emphasizes that calcium is just one nutrient that's crucial to bone health, and that there are at least 15 or 17 other ones, and things like phosphorus and potassium and magnesium and manganese. I mean, he went down this whole list, not to mention vitamin D. So what is the role of all these other nutrients in maintaining bone health?
Well, it's absolutely right that we need a whole orchestra of minerals and vitamins to build and maintain healthy bones. And all of those elements that you mentioned are essential for bone health. The question is, are people in our population actually short or so short of these minerals that some people are increasing the risk of fractures because of them? Of all of those that you mentioned, the one where the evidence is strongest is vitamin D as being a factor that's way below what it should be in the American population. From what we've seen through many kinds of evidence, and including randomized trials which used higher doses of vitamin D, there is a benefit in taking higher amounts, and most Americans, about two-thirds of Americans, have what appear to be inadequate blood levels of vitamin D. So this is really a big issue, and the consequences of inadequate vitamin D appear to be far beyond bone health from what we're seeing emerge.
Now, higher amounts is a little nonspecific. Can you please tell us how much vitamin D should someone be taking to prevent osteoporosis? Vitamin D is one of those nutrients that you can overdose on, isn't it?
Yes, and you can overdose on almost any nutrient. Something that's essential in too big a quantity is capable of producing some toxicity. But it looks like we're way on the low side of vitamin D intake in the American population. It's mainly because of a change in lifestyle that traditionally, the major source of vitamin D was sunlight, not diet. We can pick up a little bit from fish, but otherwise we really don't get much in our diet at all. Sunlight is the primary natural source of vitamin D. And if you just step back and look at what we've done to our lifestyle, we've really cut ourselves off from the sun. So the question, how much should we be taking to make up for that loss? If we go out in the sun more, we can certainly get more vitamin D. We can get plenty of vitamin D that way, but there is a delicate balancing act between increasing skin cancer risk and getting enough vitamin D, and it's just really hard for most people to walk that tightrope adequately. So I think for most of us, taking a vitamin D supplement is the way to go, and what dose is a big question, but it looks like probably to get most people up to adequate levels of vitamin D is going to require 3,000 or 4,000 international units.
Dr. Walter Willett, one of the points that Michael Castleman and his co-author have made in their new book, Building Bone Vitality, is that a vegetarian diet is helpful, not essential, but if you eat 5 to 8 helpings of fresh fruits and vegetables, that the epidemiology would suggest that's a diet that's going to be good for your bones because it's going to supply a lot of those extra nutrients. And he goes a little further to say that a high-protein diet, the sort of classic American diet, which is very high in animal protein, might be counterproductive because it has an acidification effect on the blood. Now, this is getting a little out there on the edges for us, but we kind of like to get your perspective on the fruits and vegetables issue and whether or not a very high meat consumption diet could be negative for the bones.
I think those are all interesting questions that are not totally resolved. That clearly eating plenty of fruits and vegetables is healthy in many ways. And what we did see in our own studies that people who were not eating enough green leafy vegetables were probably not getting enough vitamin K, and that eating more green leafy vegetables was beneficial. You do need some calcium in there, and I think on some vegetarian diets you could end up, if you ate no dairy products and very little animal products, you might end up on the short side of calcium. You can go too low. We do need some. So exactly where that line is, where you swing into a level where you are on the short side, we don't really have that fine detail yet. The question about too much protein is an interesting one, and I think the final answer on that is still yet to be determined. It's not been clear in the several looks that we had that higher protein intake was deleterious for fracture risk.
So if you were trying to design a program for people who you care about or for the public at large, what would be your recommendations to help keep bones strong for both women as well as men?
So far, I think what we see to be an overall healthy diet, plenty of vegetables, moderate amount of fruit, a modest amount of animal protein, but not high animal protein, are all important. Dairy is not essential. We do need some calcium, and I think it's fine to have 1 or maybe 2 servings of dairy a day, but higher amounts, I think the adverse effects are probably going to start outweighing the benefits. But one part that you didn't mention that's really important is that physical activity is profoundly beneficial for bone health. And every study that's looked at that has seen much lower risk of fractures among people who are physically active. And it really applies to the bones that are exercised, the bones that are stressed. So walking and other weight-bearing exercise definitely very importantly reduces rates of hip fracture, but it may not do much to wrist fracture, and so we need other exercises for our upper body bones to keep them strong. So really what this boils down to in a very simple way is if you care about your bone health and preventing fractures, don't drink the milk, but take your cow for a walk.
Okay. Well, of course, I imagine that people who were traditional dairy farmers probably were getting all the exercise they need. But nowadays, we have to go out looking for exercise. And I know that several of your recent studies have looked at exercise. How much do we need? What kind do we need? So what kind of exercise do you suggest if your friends and neighbors ask you?
Well, again, you have to look at all the health consequences of exercise, and I think what's really important is a variety of exercise. The good news is that just plain walking at a moderate to brisk pace will have tremendously important health benefits for diabetes, for heart disease, for stroke prevention, and for prevention of fractures as well. I think it's, apart from just bone health, some aerobic exercise is part of the combination is definitely an advantage for cardiovascular disease, but for bone health, just walking briskly seems to provide virtually all of the benefits that we can get from exercise.
And you mentioned that the bones that are strengthened are the ones that we're actually putting stress on. It sounds as though perhaps tennis or something that uses the upper arms as well might also be helpful.
Absolutely. Tennis is great that way, but if you just play with your right hand, that may not do much for your left hand either. So if you don't play tennis, though, just a few minutes, a few times, 2 or 3 times a week with some free weights or some other way of exercising the upper extremities can have a really important effect on weight and bone health. It's amazing how big an effect a very modest amount of exercise can have.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Scandinavians because they have had a lot of problems with osteoporosis. They consume a lot of dairy, but they've also been very fond of cod liver oil. They may be among the world's greatest consumers of cod liver oil, and there were some studies a while back that suggested cod liver oil might be bad for the bones because of too much vitamin A. What's the latest on that story?
I think after that initial evidence, the story has really strengthened that too much vitamin A in the form that we call preformed vitamin A or retinol, not the vegetable form like beta-carotene, but too much of the preformed vitamin A can increase the risk of fractures. Actually, as you mentioned, our colleagues in Sweden first published this about 10 or 15 years ago, and we looked at that in our own study, in the Nurses' Health Study, and we confirmed it. We had more detail, and we could see that high intake of liver was related to higher risk of fractures, and liver is has a very high concentration of vitamin A. And also, even multiple vitamins that contained 5,000 international units, even at that level, there was some increase in risk of hip fractures. So following that, the makers of multiple vitamins have pretty much by now all reduced the amount of preformed vitamin A in their preparations, and the amount in fortified cereals has been reduced as well. So we actually, I think, have had an important effect on eliminating most of the problem with high intake of vitamin A. And the probable mechanism is that vitamin A and vitamin D compete at the same receptors inside the cell. So if you take too much vitamin A, you'll be interfering with the action of vitamin D.
Dr. Walter Willett, we want to thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It's been my pleasure.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening to the People's Pharmacy, and thanks to our guests. Dr. Walter Willett is Chairman and Professor of Nutrition at Harvard University School of Public Health.
We also spoke with Michael Castleman, medical journalist and co-author of Building Bone Vitality, a revolutionary diet plan to prevent bone loss and reverse osteoporosis. His co-author is Dr. Amy Joy Lanu.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Peter Bombar is our technical production supervisor, and Al Wodarski helps engineer the program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. Sarah Ovenall is the wizard behind our website.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care Cream enriched with urea. They're aids for dry, cracked skin. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 752. That number again, 800-732-2334, or you can find it on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
And when you go to the website, you can find out about prescription drugs and over-the-counter medicines and dietary supplements, all kinds of interesting stuff on that website.
You can also sign up for our free weekly electronic newsletter. You can subscribe to our podcast. They'll be delivered straight to your computer. You'll never have to miss another People's Pharmacy show again, and you can share them with your friends. And you can also find out about our new book, Favorite Foods from the People's Pharmacy, with all kinds of tips on vegetables and fruits and what the DASH diet's all about. That's the Dietary Approaches to Stopping Hypertension. It's all there at www.peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks so much for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.